I put the kettle on for tea. I wasn't going to drink because my hands needed something to do, and I sat at my kitchen table with a folded piece of paper in front of me that had my name written on it in handwriting I had helped teach 40 years ago, and I read it 3 times before I understood that the 4 words I had heard through the garage door 20 minutes earlier were not a misunderstanding. My daughter's voice, low, the voice of someone who thought her father was asleep in front of the television with the sound turned up the way it always is now that my hearing isn't what it was. She said, "He already transferred it." I did not move from my chair. I sat there with my tea going cold, and I thought about the drawer in my study where I kept the folder with the deed and the trust and the account statements, and I thought about the fact that I had not transferred anything to anyone, and I understood, in the particular slow way a man understands a thing he does not want to be true, that someone had used my name to move money I had spent 31 years earning, and that the someone was my own daughter, and that she was not alone in the garage when she said it. My name is Walter Reyes. I am 66 years old, and I have lived on Larkspur Court in a suburb outside Sacramento since 1994, in a house my wife Carol and I bought when the street was still half dirt and the developer hadn't finished the sidewalks. Carol passed 18 months ago. Pancreatic cancer, the fast kind. 4 months from diagnosis to the morning, I woke up next to an empty side of the bed that has never once, not for a single night since, felt like anything other than empty. We were married 39 years. I'm not going to try to make you feel what that is, because words are a poor tool for it, but I'll tell you this. The lemon tree she planted the spring before she got sick produced its first real harvest last month, and I stood in the backyard with a paper bag picking lemons I didn't know what to do with, and I cried in a way I hadn't let myself cry at the funeral, because the funeral was for other people watching, and the backyard was just for the tree and for me. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer, mostly bridges and overpasses for the state, the kind of work where if you do it right, nobody ever thinks about you, and if you do it wrong, it's on the news. I did it right. I retired in 2021, a year before Carol got sick, and those months we had together in retirement before her diagnosis, I hold on to them the way you hold on to the last dry match in the rain. My daughter Priya is 38. She lives 25 minutes away in a newer development with her husband Marcus, and they have the kind of life that looks, from a distance, like it's going fine. A house with a pool, nobody swims in, 2 cars in the driveway. A lot of talk about a business Marcus runs that I have never fully understood the shape of. Something in commercial real estate consulting, though the description of it has shifted more than once over the years, in a way that used to just seem like normal ambition, and now, looking back, seems like something else. My son Dennis is 35, from a marriage I had before I met Carol, a short one in my 20s that ended amicably enough that Dennis grew up knowing both his parents, and never once made me feel like the divorce was a wound he carried. Dennis lives in Portland. He's an ER nurse. He calls every Sunday, without fail, and he came down for 6 straight weeks when Carol was in hospice and slept on an air mattress in the room next to hers so he could take the overnight shifts and let me sleep. And I want you to hold on to Dennis while I tell you the rest of this, the way you'd hold on to a photograph you know you're going to need later. Priya had been wonderful after Carol died. I want to say that honestly, because the truth of what came later doesn't erase the truth of what came before it, and if I let myself pretend she was always circling me like something waiting to happen, I'd be lying to you and to myself. She called constantly those first months. She came over on weekends and cooked, sat with me through the parts of grief that don't have a schedule, the Tuesday afternoons that suddenly become unbearable for no reason anyone can predict. She helped me with paperwork, insurance forms, the death certificate copies, the changeover on the utilities, the kind of administrative grief that nobody warns you about, where losing a spouse means becoming, overnight, the person responsible for 40 small bureaucratic tasks you'd never had to think about because she'd always handled them. I was grateful. I want you to understand I was grateful, and grief makes a man porous in a way he doesn't notice at the time. You let people in because letting them in feels like the opposite of being alone, and you don't ask yourself what else they're picking up while they're in there, helping. It was a Thursday evening, and Priya had asked to borrow my truck to move a bookshelf. Said Marcus's back was out again. Said it would just be an hour. I said of course. Told her the keys were on the hook by the door, the same hook they'd been on since we moved in, and I told her to be careful, and I went and sat in front of the television because that's where I sit most evenings now. And I must have dozed off around 9 because I woke up to voices in the garage, low, and I realized the volume on the TV had covered the sound of her coming back and covered, too, whatever had happened before I woke. I sat very still. The garage shares a wall with the family room, thin enough that on a quiet night you can hear the truck door, the garage door motor, and that night I heard something else. Marcus's voice, and Priya's voice. And then Priya said the 4 words. He already transferred it. In a man's voice, Marcus's, said, "Are you sure the account shows it cleared?" And Priya said, "It has to. I signed exactly where you told me to sign, in his name, the way we practiced." I did not move. I sat in my recliner with the television playing something I couldn't have named 5 seconds later, and I listened to the garage door open and my truck pull out again, not into the driveway, back onto the street, and I understood they were leaving, not staying. And I got up and went straight to my study, to the desk where I keep the fireproof lockbox with the trust documents and the account statements Carol and I built across 3 decades of not spending money we didn't need to spend. I opened the box. The folder that held the certificate of trust and my most recent brokerage statements was gone. In its place was a single index card, and on it, in handwriting that was close to mine but not mine, close enough to fool a bank teller glancing at a signature card, but not close enough to fool the man whose signature it was imitating, were 3 words. "Sorry, Dad. Later. I want to tell you what was in that folder, because I need you to understand the size of what had just walked out of my garage." Carol and I had built, over 30 years, a retirement account and a joint investment portfolio that Carol had insisted on managing herself after she took an evening class in personal finance in 2003. Of all things, because she didn't trust the advisor our bank had assigned us, and she turned out to be right not to. That account, at last statement, held $380,000. There was also the deed to the house, paid off since 2016, and a certificate of trust that named Priya and Dennis as equal beneficiaries, drawn up the year after Carol's diagnosis when we knew we needed to get our affairs settled while she was still well enough to sit with the attorney and make sure it was done exactly as she wanted. My daughter and her husband had, it seemed, decided that equal was a negotiable term and that the fastest way to make it negotiable was to open a new account somewhere using a signature that was mine in appearance and not, in fact, using access she had built not through a single dramatic moment, but through 18 months of casserole dishes and utility bill, phone calls, and being the daughter who showed up, the way a person can learn every room in a house, not by being given a key, but by being let in so often nobody thinks to ask why she's still there after the errand is done. I sat down at my kitchen table with the index card in front of me, and I did not cry, and I did not call Priya, and I did not do anything for almost 40 minutes, except sit with my hands flat on the table, the way I used to sit at review meetings, when a bridge design had a flaw in it that everyone else in the room hadn't spotted yet, and I let myself see the whole shape of the problem before I let myself feel anything about it. Then I got a legal pad from the drawer, and I started writing. What I knew, what I didn't know yet. What the index card told me, which was that she knew I would eventually find the folder gone, which meant she wasn't planning to hide this from me forever, which meant either she thought I'd forgive it once it was done, or she thought I'd have no way to undo it once it was done. I wrote until nearly 1 in the morning, and by the time I put the pen down, I had a short list of exactly what I needed to do, in exactly what order, the way I used to plan a site inspection. Call Dennis. Do not call Priya. Find a lawyer in the morning, someone who did not know my family socially. Do not sign anything, touch anything, agree to anything, until I understood what had actually happened to the account. I called Dennis at 6 the next morning because I knew he'd be finishing a night shift and would actually answer. And I told him everything, start to finish. The garage, the 4 words, the index card. He was quiet for a long moment, the particular quiet of a man absorbing something that rearranges his understanding of people he loves. And then he said, "Dad, don't call her back yet. Let me get off shift and I'll help you find someone good." Dennis knew a nurse practitioner whose husband was an elder law attorney in Sacramento, a man named Arthur Kessler, and by 9 that morning, I was sitting across a desk from him with my legal pad and the index card in a plastic sandwich bag, because some instinct, maybe 31 years of documenting everything on a job site, told me not to handle it more than I already had. Arthur read the card twice. He asked me to start from the beginning, not from last night, from the beginning, and I told him about Carol's finance class in 2003 and the trust drawn up after her diagnosis and Priya's 18 months of help, and he wrote steadily the entire time without interrupting. When I finished, he set his pen down. In California, he said, moving funds using a signature that isn't the account holder's, even a family member's signature, without valid power of attorney, is not a gray area. If she opened a new account or authorized a transfer using your name, that's forgery, and depending on the amount, it's a felony. But before we talk about any of that, I need to know exactly what moved and where it went. And the fastest way to find that out is to call the brokerage directly. This morning, as your attorney, he paused. Is there any paperwork in the last year you signed without reading closely? Anything Priya brought over and said was routine? I thought about it, and there was something. 6 weeks earlier, Priya had come by with what she called an updated beneficiary form, said the brokerage required it after Carol's death to formally close out her name from the joint account and confirm the surviving structure. She'd set 2 pages in front of me at this same kitchen table, tabbed with sticky arrows at the signature lines, and I had signed where she pointed, because grief had made me the kind of man who trusted his daughter's tabs more than his own reading, and because there had been a great deal of paperwork already that year, and I was tired in the specific, bottomless way. 18 months without your wife makes you tired. I told Arthur this. He underlined it twice on his own notes. I need the original of that document, he said. Do you have a copy? I did not. Priya had taken the signed pages with her, said the brokerage needed originals mailed in. Here's what we do, Arthur said. I call the brokerage this morning as your attorney of record and request an immediate hold on the account pending review of a suspected unauthorized transfer, and I ask for a full transaction history going back 90 days. I also send a certified letter today disputing any document signed in the last 2 months that you don't have a verified copy of. And Walter, I need you to understand something. The moment the brokerage flags this account, your daughter is going to know, probably within hours, and she is going to call you. And whatever she says to you on that phone call, I need you to say as little as possible and let her talk. He looked at me steadily. Are you prepared for where this goes, if it's what it looks like? I thought about the 4 words through the garage wall. He already transferred it. It already went somewhere, I said. I'm just the last one to find out. Arthur had the hold placed by 11 that morning. Priya called at 2:15. I let it ring twice and picked up because Arthur told me to, and her voice had the rehearsed warmth of someone who'd practiced the opening line more than once. Hi, Dad. Just checking in on you. You doing okay today? Fine, I said, and let the silence after it do the work I wasn't going to do with more words. She'd expected more, I think, a confused father who'd noticed the folder missing and needed the story explained to him gently. What she got instead was a man who'd spent the morning in an attorney's office. Listen, she said, after the pause went on a beat too long. Marcus and I have been thinking, and we want to come by and talk to you about some financial planning stuff. Would tomorrow work? Not tomorrow, I said. Another pause, longer this time. Okay, she said, quieter. Whenever you're ready. I hung up and called Arthur and told him what she'd said, and he told me good, and told me not to schedule anything until he heard back from the brokerage's fraud department. The brokerage called Arthur back at 4 that afternoon. A new account had in fact been opened 11 days earlier at a different institution across town, jointly in my name and Priya's, using a notarized authorization bearing my signature. The notary stamp traced to a mobile notary service that operated out of a strip mall near the outlet stores. 11 days ago was a Tuesday. 11 days ago, I had spent the entire afternoon in my own backyard picking the first lemons off Carol's tree, a task that had taken hours because I'd insisted on doing it by hand instead of just shaking the branches, and I had photographs on my phone with timestamps proving exactly where I was, because Dennis had asked me to send him pictures of the harvest, and I had 3 separate texts, all time-stamped, all showing me standing under that tree 11 days before a stranger with a notary stamp supposedly watched me sign a form across town. Arthur said it plainly, the way a man states a fact rather than reaches a conclusion. The timeline makes it academic, Walter. You have photographic proof of your location. This is forgery. And the transfer authorization used that forged notarization to move $110,000 from the brokerage account into the new joint one 3 days ago. $110,000. Not the full 380. A first withdrawal, tested and confirmed, with more clearly intended to follow once the mechanism proved it worked. They had built the pipe. They had already run the first amount through it, and they'd have kept running more through until someone stopped them. And the person who stopped them was a man asleep in a recliner who happened to wake up at the wrong moment for them and the right moment for himself. I sat with that number for a long time. $110,000. Money Carol had watched grow for 3 decades. Money she'd learned to manage herself because she didn't trust a stranger with it, moved out from under both of us in 11 days by our daughter and her husband, using a forged signature and a notary who either didn't check an ID or didn't care to. I thought about how close I had come to sleeping through the whole thing, to waking up the next morning, calling Priya, and asking gently about a folder that seemed misplaced, and letting her explain it away in that same rehearsed, warm voice. And I thought about what the pipe would have carried through it by the time I noticed anything was wrong for real. 20 minutes. That's how close it was. 20 minutes of a television left too loud, and a nap I almost didn't wake from in time. Arthur filed the fraud report with the Sacramento County Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit that Friday, 5 days after the garage. By then, his folder held the forensic document examiner's report, comparing the signature on the transfer authorization against verified samples of mine from tax returns and my retirement paperwork, finding it inconsistent in 11 distinct measurable respects. It held the notary log, which showed no record of my name on the date claimed. It held my 3 time-stamped lemon tree photographs, which turned out to be, in Arthur's words, the single cleanest alibi I've seen in 11 years of doing this work. And it held one more thing, which I need to tell you about in the order it actually happened, because some things belong in their order. The Friday morning after the garage, after the list and the attorney and the time-stamped photos, I had done one more thing before going home. I stopped at an electronics store off the interstate and bought a small digital voice recorder, the kind that clips inside a shirt pocket, because I had decided that if Priya was going to come to my house again, warm-voiced and rehearsed, I was not going to be the only version of that conversation that existed afterward, only in my memory. I clipped it into my shirt pocket, and I went home, and I waited. She came on Sunday. She hadn't been invited, but I hadn't told her not to. And she arrived at 11 with a box of the cinnamon rolls from the bakery on Fair Oaks she knew I liked, which is a specific kind of gesture that's harder to be angry at than a hostile one would be. And I suspect she knew that. Marcus didn't come with her. She poured coffee at my own counter with the ease of someone who still thought of this kitchen as partly hers, which I noticed and said nothing about. We talked about small things first, the way people do when they're steering toward something and need the room's temperature set before they can say it. Then she said, "Dad, I wanted to explain about the account." "All right," I said. "I know finding that note probably seemed strange," she said, "but Marcus and I have honestly been really worried about you, financially, since Mom passed. The market's been unpredictable, and your money isn't structured to protect you if things go bad, and we thought if we set something up jointly, we could both keep an eye on it, and it would give you a layer of protection." She said protection. She was describing access to $110,000 of my dollars as something she'd done for my own safety. "I see," I said. "The signature authorization," I said. "The one with my name on it, notarized on a Tuesday. I was standing in the backyard picking lemons with 3 time-stamped photos to prove it." Something in her face moved. Not much. A degree. The first crack of uncertainty. "That's from the beneficiary paperwork," she said. "You signed that weeks ago, Dad, remember? After Mom's estate stuff." "I remember signing a beneficiary form," I said. "I do not remember authorizing $110,000 to move into a new account with a notary stamp from a strip mall I've never been to." The kitchen went very quiet. "Dad," she started. "I also want you to know," I said, "that Arthur Kessler placed a hold on the account Thursday morning, that the brokerage's fraud department has already confirmed the transfer and the forged notarization, and that a report was filed with the Sheriff's Financial Crimes Unit on Friday, and that the document examiner found 11 separate inconsistencies between that signature and my actual handwriting." I looked at her. I'm not telling you this to punish you before you've had a chance to say anything. I'm telling you so you understand exactly where things stand before you decide what you say next. Because what gets said in this kitchen in the next few minutes between a father and a daughter, that's going to be something we both carry a long time, whatever the lawyers end up doing with the rest of it. Priya sat with her hands around a coffee cup she wasn't drinking from, and outside the kitchen window you could see the lemon tree, still holding a few fruits I hadn't gotten to. Carol's tree, planted the spring before she got sick, and Priya had stood near that tree at Carol's memorial gathering 18 months earlier and cried real tears into my shoulder. And now she sat at this table, having tried to take a piece of the life that tree represented. She put her face in her hands. I've learned to know the difference between a performance and the real thing, and this was not a performance. This was a woman arriving at the actual bottom of something she'd built and finding it much harder down there than she'd expected. When she finally looked up, her face had done something I hadn't seen since she was small, before she learned to keep those moments hidden behind something more composed. "I'm in so much trouble," she said. "I know," I said. "Marcus's consulting business," she said. "It's been failing for almost 2 years. We're behind on the mortgage, behind on 2 other things I don't even want to say out loud. He kept telling me it was temporary, that we'd bridge it with something small and pay it back before you ever needed to know, and I told myself that made it okay, because it wasn't stealing if we were going to put it back. It is not temporary," I said, "and it was stealing the moment you signed my name to a piece of paper." "I know that now," she said, and she was crying. "The real kind, not performed. Priya," I said, and my voice was steady, because I'd spent 5 days learning to feel things carefully instead of immediately, and that practice held. "You forged my signature. You took money that was your mother's as much as mine. Money she managed herself because she didn't trust anyone else with it. Those aren't things a phone call undoes." She nodded, hands flat on the table. "I know," she said. "Arthur handles what happens next with the law," I said. "That's not something I control anymore, not since I let him file the report, and I'm not going to pretend I can take it back now, even if some part of me wanted to. But what I have a say in is this kitchen, right now. And what I want to say is that I love you the same way your mother loved you, which doesn't stop, not for this, not for anything. But I'm not going to tell you it's okay, because it isn't, and your mother and I raised you to know the difference." She cried for a long time after that, and I let her, because some things need to be fully felt before a person can learn anything from them. When she finally wiped her face, she asked, "What do I do?" "You call your own lawyer today," I said, "before anything else, and you tell them everything, not the version that sounds better. Whatever Arthur's office needs from you to cooperate with the investigation, you give it. And you tell Marcus that whatever he's been managing alone, that's over. You're both facing it honestly now, starting today." "The account," I said, "closes today if the brokerage will let it happen that fast." "I'll call them," she said. "And every document you took from that folder," I said, "comes back to me in the condition it left in." "Yes," she said. She left a little after one. I watched from the kitchen window as she sat in her car in the driveway for a long while before she finally called someone, and then she drove away, and I called Dennis, and he answered on the first ring because he always does when it's me, and I told him everything, start to finish, the way I'd told Arthur. And he was quiet through most of it, the specific quiet of someone listening completely, instead of preparing what to say next. When I finished, he said, "Dad, are you okay?" "I will be," I said. "I'm driving down tonight," he said. "You've got work in the morning. I've got vacation days I never use," he said, in the same gentle, immovable voice his mother used to use on me, a voice I have never once successfully argued with in either of them. He was at my door by 9 that night, with a duffel bag and a container of the green chili stew from the place near his apartment that he knew I liked, and he set it on the stove and came into the kitchen and looked at me the way Carol used to look at me when she wanted to see for herself that something was true. "You look tired," he said. "I am tired," I said. "Sit," he said. "I'll heat this up." We ate at the kitchen table out of 2 of Carol's old bowls, the ones with the blue rim she'd bought at a farmer's market in the 90s. And we didn't talk much about Priya at first, just about ordinary things, a book Dennis was reading, a coworker of his who'd just had a baby, whether the lemon tree would produce again next year, The small, ordinary things that remind a man there's a life continuing on both sides of whatever just happened to it. At one point, Dennis looked at the table and said quietly, "Mom would have been furious." "Yes," I said. "And then she'd have asked what Priya needed to actually fix it," he said. "Yes," I said, in that order always. Dennis smiled, small and real. "I got that part from her too," he said, "the fury first." "It's a useful quality," I said, "in the right measure." We washed the bowls together afterward, the way you wash dishes with someone you've done it with your whole life. No discussion needed about who washes and who dries, and when we finished, Dennis dried his hands and said, "I'm setting you up with a real system for your documents, Dad. Digital copies backed up somewhere secure, and a second physical set that I keep in Portland, and we're both going to know where everything is, all of it, and this can't happen again the way it happened this time." "All right," I said. "And I'm not just calling on Sundays anymore," he said. "Tuesdays too." I looked at my son, 35 years old, standing in his late mother's kitchen with a dish towel in his hands, making a plan without being asked to. "You don't have to restructure your whole week around this," I said. "I know I don't," he said. "That's why it counts." I lay in bed that night with the window cracked and the crickets going outside, Dennis down the hall in his old room, and I thought about the difference between a kind of love that shows up only when there's something in it, and a kind that shows up with a duffel bag and green chili stew, and no agenda but making sure you're not alone in the parts that are hard. Those are two different lessons, and I learned them both within 5 days of each other, one through 4 words, heard through a garage wall at 9 at night, the other through a son who drove down without being asked and didn't leave until the dishes were dry. They didn't feel like the same kind of knowledge at first, but I've come to understand they come from the same place, which is paying close attention to what is actually being built around you while you're busy trusting the people who show up, instead of asking yourself why they keep showing up in the first place. The investigation is still moving. Arthur tells me the district attorney's office is treating the amount and the forged notarization seriously, and that Priya's own attorney has been cooperative, which he says is the best sign available at this stage, though I've stopped trying to predict how it ends. What I can tell you is that the brokerage froze the new account within 48 hours of that Sunday conversation, that the notarized authorization has been formally disputed and referred to the state notary licensing board, and that a new estate plan is being drawn up now, not out of anger but out of accuracy, reflecting what I actually want for the people I actually trust, rather than what a document from years earlier assumed before a Thursday night taught me what 4 words through a wall can reveal about a house you thought you knew completely. Carol's lemon tree is still out there along the back fence. I stood under it again this morning with my coffee, and it doesn't know anything about what happened in the kitchen behind it. It's just doing what she planted it to do, holding on through one more season, bearing fruit it doesn't know the history of. I'm trying to do the same. 66 years old, retired engineer, widower, father to 2 very different kinds of children. A man who woke up at the wrong hour for someone else's plans and the right hour for his own, and who made a list, and called a lawyer and ate green chili stew with his son out of his late wife's bowls. That's the true version. That's what actually happened. And after 31 years spent making sure structures hold under the weight they weren't supposed to fail under, I've come to believe that's still the only thing that ever really matters. Whether a thing holds, I held. If you're still with me, tell me one word for what you felt when you heard there were only 20 minutes between a nap and $110,000. And if someone in your life has been let into every room of your house, one small errand at a time, pay attention to what they've actually learned while they were in there. Check the folder, call the lawyer, and ask your daughter, gently, what exactly she meant by protection.